Good evening and happy Monday to everybody. I hope you're all staying warm out there. It's January in Fargo, and I had the most frightening 15 minutes of my life yesterday driving around on the interstate in, 10 foot to zero visibility. I was unaware on my way home that we were going into no travel advised territory, but, God kept me safe, and all the other drivers on the road also did their part. So thanks be to God for that. Now, we've talked about this topic a number of times on this live stream that I am actually a recovering materialist. What I mean by that is, despite having a Catholic upbringing, there were materialist presuppositions that kind of snuck their way into my head. It was in the water, it was in the air, it was in the books I was reading. Who knows where it came from. And thanks be to God, when I was in seminary, these things that were certainly incompatible with my faith began to be exposed and began to be corrected. And, one of those things that happened very early on was, I think it was in my second year of seminary, we took a philosophy of nature course, which is sort of like a intro to metaphysics, study of being as such. And we started taking a close look at the scientific method and what is it that the scientific method can say about things. And it was a very close examination of what science, what sort of insights the scientific method can yield for you, and the sorts of things that it cannot find out for you. And that's where some of my thinking started to get straightened out. Obviously, the Lord was moving me in different ways and was helping to cure me of these overly materialistic processes. But the actual work I was doing in the classroom was a part of that. So, scientific method, and this was a flaw I had begin to identify in people with materialistic conclusions there. So they would take the materialism and the empiricism of the scientific method, right? That we're not going to consider any sort of spiritual causality. We're not going to consider any sort of vertical causality, if you like to use that kind of language. We're instead just going to be looking at the matter that's around us, and only that which we can measure is going to be a part of our considerations. Now, when you do this properly and you control for the independent and dependent variables, and you've got the repeat experimentation that other people can perform, and all of those different things which are part and parcel of the scientific method, it allows you to do some pretty good empiricism with things that are made out of material and can be measured. That's all that can do. That's all that it can tell you about. And what I realized was a common flaw that people were finding themselves in was taking the presuppositions of the scientific method, which has its utility, and making that a presupposition of all of their thinking. That's where people get a little bit mixed up. They just assume that everything that exists and everything that is true and everything that can be spoken about is something that's made out of stuff and can be empirically measured. When you take that as a presupposition for everything and not just the method that you're using to explore and discover certain parts of reality, that's where your thinking starts getting very confused, because there'll be all sorts of things in your view of the universe that you are incapable of accounting of. And what spurred this thought for our little talk tonight was actually the long driving I did this weekend and the podcast that accompanied it. The recent episodes from The Rest is History Tom Holland and Dominic Sambrook's history podcast on St. Joan of Arc. St. Joan of Arc is just the best. If you don't believe me, they do an okay job in those episodes. There's a few things they don't quite get right, of course. You can ask me about that a little bit later. But this is where that methodological limitation comes in, right? So Dr. Holland and Dr. Stanbrook are both limiting their study to the methods of modern historiography. And it's got a bit of an empirical bent to it, that which can be measured. And most historians are not trained to look for the interaction of angels and demons, to look for divine intervention in anything. And sometimes, that works out okay. They can do a certain amount of history and usefully explain things without reference to those sorts of things. But with Saint Joan of Arc, the Holy Maid of Orleans, you absolutely just can't understand it. They have to sit there and be like, well, it's very obvious that Jeanne d'Arc was a very charismatic person, that she had this uncanny ability to convince people to take her side, and yeah, boy, charismatic. Why don't we just back the etymology of that word up, and we don't have to leave it in its semi-untranslated state. We could just very simply say that Joan of Arc was anointed. That Joan of Arc was anointed by God, and as much as it pains me to say this, I think we have all of the evidence we need to say that God actually took the side of the French at the conclusion of the 100 Years' War and raised up the most improbable person to become a military commander and lifts the siege of Orleans and bring Charles VII to his coronation, which massively turned the tide in the 100 Years' War. And, you would expect that to be accomplished by a king or a nobleman or a great general, not a 16-year-old peasant girl without any military training whatsoever. And so, because I, being a priest, am not limited to the methods of modern historiography, I can tell you a lot better what went on during the conclusion of the 100 Years' War than can these Oxford-trained historians. That it's actually very simple, that God chose Joan of Arc to lift the siege of Orleans and to bring Charles VII to his coronation. And, Mark Twain was actually, I think, rather convinced of this. You can read his semi-fictionalized biography of Joan of Arc. And his opinion is that if King Charles had continued listening to Joan of Arc and had just gone nonstop on the attack until the English were gone, they would have driven them out in 2 years instead of the roughly 20 that it took to finally reclaim all those lands for the French crown there. So, because of the limitations of their methodology, they are not able to get to the full truth of the picture. These Oxford-trained historians cannot see the work of God in the life of St. Joan of Arc. They can't consider it, and therefore they have to stay in a position of bafflement and confusion as to what actually happens. But if you're allowed a little bit more leeway here to look at the facts and consider them soberly, you can say that God did in fact intervene here. And boy, I wonder where else God has intervened in history. That might be a useful thing for somebody to consider. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a dumb priest from a very, very cold part of the world. And that's what I have. So let's take a look what we got in the comments here. Ixnon says good evening, and I say good evening back. If you have a final cause, science can help you refine material towards it. Yes, yes, that's what the final cause has to come from us, cannot come from all the stuff that we're studying it. Indeed, they stray into religious language every time, like clockwork. Being charismatic's not religious. Definitely doesn't have anything to do with the Greek word charisma, which is the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And we get that primarily in English through our consideration of biblical texts. And now we will open this up. It is an open mic. The StreamYard link is open. You can come in here and tell me why I'm wrong about Joan of Arc or why I'm right. Or you can talk about if you got something interesting on your mind, you can come in here and bring it up. But I am here and staying cozy while the wind howls outside. Yeah, yesterday I was covering for another priest in a parish that's a long ways away from here. Most of the drive was pretty tolerable, but just the 20 minutes outside of Fargo, oh, hell broke loose. Absolute worst visibility I've ever driven in my life. Couldn't see more than about 10 feet in front of the car. And it's actually pretty dangerous to slow down too much in those circumstances because the person behind you might not slow down as quickly as you have. So you've got to find the right match between being able to stop for somebody in front of you and not getting rear-ended in the blindness, which is why it was a no travel advised. But like I said, I didn't know that when I was coming home. Otherwise, I might have slowed down a little bit. Speaking of slowed down, what took you so long?
I have no idea. Your link did not work. My browser just kept spinning, and I was like, what's happening? And so rather than trying to fix it, I went to the other StreamYard tab that I always have open, and that didn't work. So I refreshed it, and that took forever. And then I was like, what is happening?
Well, we're
So
just going to go ahead and blame StreamYard's servers for this.
yeah.
What do we got going on here? I mentioned her in a conversation today about being an individual that broke the rules, law, to bring about a great outcome. This is the thing, and
Nope.
this is one of the thing that that these guys missed, right? So, at the time, there was a great controversy over Joan of Arc wearing male clothing because that's kind of an odd thing. And, they had a very strictly regulated societal expectations around those things. But what they didn't avert to was the fact that in the very Summa of St. Thomas, second part of the second part, question 169, Article 2, response to objection 3, says that, well, ordinarily, as the book of Deuteronomy says, women shouldn't wear men's clothing, and vice versa, I think was the implication there. But if there's actually a compelling reason to do so, either remaining hidden from one's enemies, or these are the only clothes at hand, or she has some necessity to do a man's work, then this can be tolerated. So and they didn't bring that up at all. Even though if that wasn't a hotly controverted point in the Summa. Sometimes when there's big arguments, you could see where the big arguments of the time were with how much St. Thomas Aquinas treats of them. And this was just kind of like a little passing mention. So it was probably a common opinion that the theologians have come up with. And I bet you $1, right? A whole United States dollar that the rabbis who do commentary on Deuteronomy have come up with the same solution. I'm just betting. I haven't looked that up at all. Maybe if Jacob were here, he could say. But
it's amazing to me, Father, how many people will do, well, Robin Hood was an outlaw, which is 1,000,000,000% false, or Joan of Arc broke the rule. No, guys, this is really easy. At least from what I've been told from sources that I trust, because I haven't actually read that silly book. Can't remember the name. Apparently, Jesus didn't even try to rebel against the authorities. He just said, do what you're going to do. And that was it. And so if you're not doing that, you're not following him. And it's just that simple. You make it more complicated if you want, but you'll be wrong. right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's like
Bizarre.
Joan of Arc. What did she do? She went to the nearest nobleman and she's like, "Hey, God's given me this mission to break the siege of Orleans, to have the king crowned, and to drive the English out of France."
Yeah.
And she just went to that guy, and he's like, "Okay." And then he sent her off to a couple of priests to, figure out who she is. They conducted a reasonable investigation. It's like, yeah, she seems like a pretty honest and trustworthy person. And then the nobleman's like, well, let's go take her to the Dauphin. And then the Dauphin's like, okay, yeah, here's an army. And then, there was some bickering amongst the ranks of the generals there, because she just wanted to go attack the English, which turned out to be the right response.
Uh-huh.
Because they were kind of overextended, and so yeah, it was tactically it worked out pretty well. But she did everything like by seeking the approval of the appropriate authorities. The cross dressing thing was like a necessity of the moment that she
Yep.
submitted to, but
It's
we'll
not
see.
rule breaking. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's the that's the problem. Yeah, Ixnan's got it right. A lot of people just want to, rewrite the stories so that their rebellion is justified. Rebellion's never ever going to be justified ever. Sorry.
but
It's not
even if
that
you
hard.
do something that looks an awful lot like a rebellion, if it's going to be justified, you need to be citing like a higher authority.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, technically, the hierarchy or somebody above you in the hierarchy can override any rule that applies to you at any time.
Mhm.
That's like the function of the hierarchy, or one of them. It's one of the main
That's
functions of the
Canon
hierarchy.
87 right there. The local ordinary can the diocesan bishop can dispense his subjects from any universally binding law, so long as it's not a procedural law, penal law reserved to the Holy See, or essentially constitutive of something. It's
Right,
built right into the canon law there.
but they want to rewrite all of these stories to justify this equality rebellion of the individual against the system or something goofy. And it's really, it's just terrible. It's just, and I actually genuinely don't understand. I'm like, why do you want this? I was listening to Sally Joe infected me with the need to watch Peter Boghossian talk to Colin Wright. And like I know Colin from Clubhouse, so I've talked to Colin before, not much or anything, but he knows. He probably knew who I was at one point. I don't think he remembers me, but that's fine. And those two are just so struggling with basically, basic questions like, what do we do with people who deny basic biology? And and they kept back and forth, and they can't resolve it because they're so anti-hierarchical, when the obvious and only solution is you need a hierarchy and someone needs to tell them to stop or to shut up or no, you can't do that. And they
Mhm.
just can't go there. Like, impossible. And I'm like, then this is why you're going to have the problem. And then it was all, we need to compromise more. And I'm like, compromise is how we got here. Like, what is the backwards thinking, the irrationality, their logic skills, both of them in the toilet, like really bad. They're terrible at logic, just awful at it. It's just sad. It's just sad. So I did a 2-part commentary on it that'll probably be coming out this week, but it's a disaster that we have so many people so horribly confused about such a simple thing. Rebellion bad, hierarchy good, revivify, don't destroy. This isn't that hard. Yeah, revivification is really hard. Destroying's much easier, but then you got to rebuild, and it will get rebuilt, but maybe not better, right? In fact, almost certainly worse. So why we want this ridiculous level of rebellion is beyond me. It hasn't been working so far.
Yeah, yeah, and like things that might look like rebellion but actually aren't. It's a matter of, like, if I don't think this would ever happen, thanks be to God, but we could imagine a scenario where these things perhaps could happen, where my bishop orders me to do something intrinsically evil. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, we've heard this report, but you're just going to shred all the paperwork, and we're not going to tell the police there, right? Imagining that sort of a scenario. If I disobeyed that command, I'm obeying God at that point, because like, just sweeping this under the rug is not a good thing, and so I wouldn't actually be in rebellion against order as such. I would just be refusing obedience to an illegitimate command, right? Because if it's downright evil, it's an illegitimate command, and you are actually obligated to not do it, because even if your superior is ordering you to do it, it's evil, and you're supposed to resist that. And that was taught to me in seminary. I don't know.
Same in the military. Why is this hard for people?
Yeah. So
There
it's
is a mechanism, but that doesn't redeem rebellion as such.
right. But just like looking at these things that might look like rebellion, but it's actually a conformity with a higher authority, because the one on the level that you're dealing with has become manifestly corrupted.
Right.
Again, I really not anticipating that. I just hold it up as an example because I'm the closest thing I have to reference. So, but it makes sense that the military would function that way too. So,
Yeah, discernment's really important.
mhm.
And rebellion is just getting around the hard work of discernment. Right. And it's it's kind of crazy. Like in this conversation, they were saying, like, we need to destroy the education system and rebuild it. And I'm like, I wouldn't trust you guys to build a Lego kit for 3-year-olds. Like, no. Like, and it's always we and they. There's never, there's no great man. Right? Like, if you're going to rebuild the entire higher education system in the United States or something crazy like that, at least nominate somebody that has a chance at being able to do anything remotely like that, instead of just saying, we need to tear it down and rebuild it. What? Why don't we make sure we have somebody that can rebuild it first?
And like, let's give them one college, and like see if they can do it there, right? Instead of like this massive, we're going to overturn it. Is the Peterson Academy going to work out? Is Ralston College going to work out? Like, we don't know. We should give it a try.
Right. But I mean, if Teddy Roosevelt were alive, I'd be like, yeah, you know what? As long as we're saying Teddy Roosevelt, then I'm all in, because he had a track record of doing. He made the modern police and fire systems in the United States. Big deal, guys. Among many other things, but like big deal stuff, really big deal stuff, right? So a great man for sure, and they knew it at the time. It's not hidden, right? So there are some figures in history that can do that. And then there are people I look at, like Jordan Peterson's trying to fix the problem with Peterson Academy. And I'm like, nah, you're not the guy. You can't do it. And you shouldn't be, right? You should be putting your considerable efforts into reforming the system that we have, rather than building a competing system that can only water things down and make everything worse. Which, by the way, you're not the first, second, or third person to do that. You should see the number of sort of small, independent, self-accredited tech schools and stuff, like just here in South Carolina. Like, why are there all these? I'm not opposed. I'm not saying they're bad, but also, like, there's an awful lot of them. And what are we doing? And what is the quality of all of them? Because they're not colleges. And so I just don't know. There's no way for me to tell, right? So, but if our response, the Boghossian and right response, is tear it all down and rebuild it, are you sure the guy to do that exists right now? Historically, maybe, but you're throwing out, a few hundred years of distributed cognition on how to make that work in favor of nothing, no plan whatsoever. Just rebuild it. No criteria, no specifications, no implementation plan, and no driving force and no vision. That's your. Let me explain to you, as somebody who's built stuff, many stuffs, That ain't gonna work, kid. I'm just gonna tell you, that's not how anything ever came to be, much less last.
Yeah. Whereas like reforming the stuff, it's like, if you've got a vision of, let's say, a functioning academia that maybe you can look back to, look back to a time when it's like this university was functioning properly. It was producing great scholars. It was, it was as fair and well run as we could hope anything on earth to be. Because you could always point at these institutions and find problems because it's run by humans, problem causers, also problem solvers. But like you get both at once. So it's like when you got that existing institution, you can just kind of look back on the blueprint and say, this is what it looked like when it worked. What can we bring back, or more of a revivification, which is much more manageable than building something from the ground up. I really do appreciate a great many of the good men who reformed the seminary system in America. The fact that I got to go to 2 cleaned houses for my education, where Catholic faith was taught in its integrity, and there was an expectation of good morals among the seminarians. And when those good morals weren't met, guys just left. We didn't see them anymore. What happened to so and so? Well, he's gone. Was it going to have anything to do with the fact that we smelled booze on his breath every day in class? That might have something to do with it. That might really have been a part of it. So, but it wasn't like a building things from the bottom up. They also had a mandate from St. John Paul II. So,
That helps.
Hey, yeah, go clean your seminaries up. These places are awful. And then the bishops were like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And then they did it. And now things are better. It's just amazing. It's just amazing, Mark.
You saying clean your room works?
It does.
Amazing.
It's a lot worse off camera.
No, yeah, you look much better. Oh, yeah, my quote office is a complete catastrophe.
Yeah, don't look over here. This is where everything's just kind of piled up.
Don't look anywhere else in my office except at the walls. This place is a disaster. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. It needs to warm up, and then I'm gonna go get my books out of the shed.
Oh, how cold is it there, Mark? Did it get down to 40 degrees?
No. It was cold all day today. I don't think it got out of the 30s. It was like 20 degrees last night.
20 degrees? Oh.
Listen, it's not my fault. You live in an unlivable part of the country, okay?
It just makes you strong. And a little arrogant, but never mind that.
What's your excuse then? There you go.
No. I was having a conversation with somebody from South Carolina, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm taking a trip to Boston, and it's 28 degrees today, and I'm freezing." And I was like, pathetic.
It's like in Goodwill Hunting. Son, you hit a cop. You're going in.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, I melt. I melt when I'm in Washington, D.C. I turn into a popsicle. It's just, a clerical collar in a puddle of something, puddle of chrism, I guess. Yeah.
Ixnat is correct. I am, in fact, a lizard. That is...
You're one of the lizard people.
I am all of the lizard people. There's really only one of me.
That's amazing. I had no idea. It explains why you and I have the same haircut,
Exactly.
You could just glue the eyebrows on, right? And that would fool people. But
the lizards are the lizard people are actually a single unit organism, much like an ant or bee colony. And I'm just like the head lizard person. I saw freaking.
Well, would you hurry up and get the global conspiracy moving in some kind of a direction?
This is the funny part about the conspiracies. They all conflict and nobody notices. So what 1 minute it looks like it's this conspiracy, the next minute it looks like it's that one. Yeah, I was watching I think there's a show called The Unexplained or something, which is just George so whatever his name, the Ancient Aliens guy, cutting up ancient aliens clips and putting them in a different order. He was doing his top 10 ancient alien archaeological sites or some nonsense. And because I have 100 billion free streaming TV services on my TV somehow.
All of them have that, by the way.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, I was listening to it and I was just like, man, my conspiracy game is just rusty. Like, I just can't compete anymore. I used to be able to do this really well, and now I feel like I've lost my edge. I'm no longer really good at that. It was,
conspiracy theorizing is. No, wait a minute, hold on. That's an old man's game. Why? It's supposed to be a crazy old timer with a bottle of hooch telling you about this, that, or the other thing.
I don't drink. That's the
problem. Oh, that's your problem.
You need to start drinking.
I think the conspiracy theories would just flow out of you if you began drinking.
By the way, intercessory prayer video is up.
Oh, why don't you drop that in the private chat, and I'll drop that into. If you try and comment on it, it won't go through. But I'll.
Yeah, I'll get that up.
Yeah, we've talked about intercessory prayer on this channel here, so yeah.
Cool.
We'll go ahead and promote the Eastern Thomists. Yeah, and then oh man. Oh.
Did you see my my latest Jordan Peterson video?
Did I see it? I don't know if I watched it.
What?
Yeah.
What kind of treatment is this?
It's what you get. I do not even say you deserve it. It's just what you're getting.
But fair. That's fair. Yeah, I'll have to check that.
I put that in the chat, and yeah, I'm gonna this Friday. I think I'm planning to do the first live stream on my channel. It's gonna be a series called Aquinas Classroom, where I basically just take certain positions that are controversial and kind of came after St. Thomas's time. Or became controversial after St. Thomas's time, like something like, do we celebrate the Sabbath on the seventh day or the first day, was kind of a settled debate by the time St. Thomas was around, but then it became more contested in contemporary times. Issues like that, and kind of showing, what St. Thomas would have viewed on that based on what he wrote. And the first episode is going to be about sola scriptura and what St. Thomas Aquinas' view was going to be. And that's going to be something, it's going to be like this, where it's going to be on StreamYard so people can join and ask questions and yell at other people if they want.
Hey, all right. No yelling, but yeah, another good one. I actually wrote a paper on this back in seminary, was St. Thomas Aquinas on women and the production of women. That's a real fascinating one, because you see how he's grappling with the flawed Aristotelian biology, trying to bring that in conformity with Christian doctrine.
Right.
So, that's a useful one.
Yeah. He gets mischaracterized. I think the two issues he's most mischaracterized on are women and the Immaculate Conception. Those are the two where everybody says he got it wrong, and I'm like, yeah, I think you might be mischaracterizing him on those two.
Well, I'd be interested to hear about the Immaculate Conception stuff. So why don't you make that another episode? And make sure you make sure you do that. If you're going to do it on Fridays, just make sure you do it before confirmations start, because once confirmations start, my weekends are just gone. Except for a little break for Holy Week,
Well, I appreciate that. I've got a regular video, not necessarily a live stream, but I do have a regular video coming, which I have like 75% done, on the Immaculate Conception and defending the Immaculate Conception, and kind of defending it from the accusations that St. Thomas Aquinas opposed it. Essentially, what I essentially argue is, when people read the Summa Theologica, it seems like he's opposing the idea of the Immaculate Conception and saying that Mary contracted original sin and then it was immediately blotted out of her. But Father Garrigou Lagrange does explain this a lot better. The argument was at the time it was believed by the majority of scientists that when a baby was conceived, that baby would go into a coma for 40 days. And so people said, well, if the baby isn't animated, that means they don't have a soul. And so St. Thomas was kind of arguing against the idea that before Mary was animated, she had a soul that was free from original sin, which is obviously not true. We don't
Before
believe in the
Mary had a soul,
pre-existence.
she had a soul that was free from original sin. It's like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, does it?
Right, exactly. And so that was the argument he was kind of arguing against, kind of like the origin, pre-existence of the soul sort of matter. And the other thing he argued against was the idea that Mary did not need Christ as her savior, which was an argument that some medieval philosophers were making at the time, which he didn't agree with, but that was more of a semantical approach. Which Blessed John Duns Scotus, who was an explicit supporter of the Immaculate Conception, even he said that Mary was in need of Christ's salvation, but that Christ's salvation was applied to her conception, kind of like how a doctor would apply medicine to someone who isn't ill yet to prevent them from contracting that illness.
Just like I take my gout medication.
Right,
I take it every day to make sure that I don't have a flare up.
Right, exactly. But I'll do that. I might do a separate live stream on that too, to go into some of the other Catholic thinkers' thoughts, like St. Anselm's thoughts and other people on that specific matter.
Yeah, and you can imagine how people came to those conclusions back then. It's like, obviously I've never had a baby before, right? But I have it on good authority that at a certain point, a pregnant woman can start to feel the child moving around inside of her, and that was called the quickening. And based on what they were able to observe in those days, the thought process is like, well, living things move, and if it's not living, then it's just like a ball of tissue that's getting ready to receive a soul, right? That was the understanding that they were operating under those times. And Thomas Aquinas wasn't engaging in a biological debate. He was doing these theological debates and just taking the biology as a given there. So, but based on his principles, and what we can do with a little biological update here and what we know about embryology and how embryos function, it's not hard to take his solid theological principles and apply it to the new science and come up with the Immaculate Conception. So.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I don't think there was ever I don't think there was ever a time in the church when the church in general denied the premise that Mary, from the moment her soul was created, was free from any stain of original sin. I mean, if you go back, even though like St. John Damascene, St. John Damascene, explicitly writes about how, Saint Joachim, from the moment your child was conceived, there was no sin inside of her. So, and even going back to Saint Ambrose, it's very clear that was something that was always believed. What's funny is it was believed probably even more in the East amongst people like Saint Ephrem the Syrian, which is kind of funny today because a lot of Eastern Orthodox Christians don't believe in the Immaculate Conception today. But it was probably mostly believed in the East.
And that's just going to be a confusion right there, because don't, in all of their divine liturgies, isn't it always the holy and sinless, Theotokos,
right?
Like holy and sinless.
What they would say is that she was conceived under the stain of original sin. They have a different view of original sin too. Like they
Right,
don't
right, right.
view like sin guilt and all that type of stuff. But they would say that she was conceived under original sin, but she was given some sort of special grace that that allowed her to her will to not sin, but they would still say that she was subject ultimately to the effects of Adam and Eve's sin.
Oh, okay. So they wouldn't have any debates about whether Mary received any of the preternatural gifts back.
Correct.
Interesting, interesting. All right. Well, the church could probably contain that if contain that level of disagreement within it. But I've always thought a lot of things come together if you say that Mary, in addition to perfect sanctifying grace, enlightened intellect, and a perfect rectitude of the will, also received the preternatural gifts, most especially integrity of body, because I think integrity of body would play in perfectly with the tradition of her giving birth to our Lord painlessly. Um, and that's, with the loss of the uh, preternatural gift of integrity, is how pain entered into childbirth in the first place. The perfect harmony of body and soul would have made the body such that it would accommodate childbirth rationally and spiritually. I don't know if that made any sense at all, but it
Yeah,
made
no,
sense up
I
there.
get what you're saying, and
Well,
that's one of the
I understand
things.
that you get what I'm saying because you've
Yeah,
studied these things, but I want to know if that made any sense to Mark because he's ignorant of such things.
I could follow that, Father. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I understand.
if anybody's confused, leave your questions in the comments.
hey,
We'll
don't
take
discriminate against lizard people. He understands.
Lizard,
Uh,
lizard people are wise. I disagree with
by the way,
the
Mark, I really liked
rational.
your role in the Spider-Man movie when you played the lizard.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
But yeah, that is one of the arguments Saint Anselm makes. Is Saint Anselm wrote that Mary was purity itself, basically making the argument that since Christ had completely or had no, he didn't have carnal origins in the sense that his birth was completely spiritual. It didn't mess with the bodily integrity of Mary in any way. And he says because of that, it wasn't befitting that Christ's mother be someone that was whose passions were carnally inclined in that manner. That was essentially the argument that St. Anselm makes a couple hundred years before St. Thomas is born.
Yeah, well, those monks will write all sorts of things, won't they?
Yeah, I don't know how important those types of connections are, right? That's usually where things go horrifically wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would ever bring these sorts of things up at the pulpit. This last weekend, I told people to put their phones down and pick up the cross. That was a very popular message, right? Because it's like I'm saying the things that everybody already believes, and they just need to hear it like said. Like
Right.
who out there honestly thinks that they need to be spending more time on their phone, more time on social media, more time watching television, more time playing video games? Like I don't know anybody who thinks that. Do you, Mark? Have you
Mm.
met anybody like that? And your strange internet people?
There are a few, but they're crazy people
Okay,
on
well,
Yeah.
many other fronts. But that's an interesting. See, Father, see this would make it interesting. So, like I said, I was watching this Peter Boghossian and Colin Wright thing, and I was just like, there were so many things they could have talked about that actually would have been interesting, and instead they're too witted to talk about anything interesting. That they had to touch on it all because they're trying to resolve something in a leftist fashion. Um, that sort of thing would be interesting. The role of propositions as a reflection for something that you already understand internally,
Mhm.
because that's really what you're talking about is which isn't, I don't want to say it's a mere reminder, although maybe it is. This is a kind of discussion that I think would be useful for people. Like, why is it that someone would ever have to tell you spending too much time on social media is bad for you, or to put down your phone,
Yeah.
or in your case, to put down your phone and instead pick up the cross, which is just a huge
Well,
upgrade, by the way.
well,
Right?
my
Why?
my deacon last Sunday was talking about he was speaking out against Islam, but during the homily. But I gotta go right now, so I'll talk to you guys soon.
Peace.
See ya.
Good luck with your live stream.
Thank you.
Yeah. See,
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll get that
that's
queued up, that video from him.
certainly the fact that I was in a position of authority in this congregation, even as just a visiting priest, right? Um, like that has something to do with it. And
Well,
it's sort of like I don't know. Let's just play with this. This is an interesting thing.
that's the
Um,
role of authority, but I mean,
mhm.
and that can play a part. But I mean, actually, what is the real utility and power of this magical thing called conversation that everyone's appealing to? That I keep saying this doesn't work the way you think, right? Okay. So there's a role in that discussion for authority, even though you would
Mhm.
flip it. You would say, "Oh no, authority is the role that makes." That's actually not true. See, that's what's important. That's not true. What is the role of authority and how do you determine it? Better, right? Better. But really, why would it why do things need to be said? And what things need to be said versus what things don't need to be said? And does it matter that it's an authority? And when does that matter? And when does that not matter? In fact, when does being an authority become a detriment? And because it's considered elitism. See, they're all of these things are actually talking about the same things, just as positive or negative by using these weird modifier words like elitism. Yes, any authority is an elite to the people under that authority. That's technically correct. Also, who cares? It's stunningly uninteresting. And then what? And then what would the role be in saying not don't pick up your phone, but do this instead? Which is what you said, which is I like that, by the way. I'm 2 thumbs upping. And people always say, "You don't like anything, Mark." Oh, I like things all the time. You're not paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, so like the basic outline of the homily was, John the Baptist pointed at Jesus and says, "He's taken away the sins of the world." And Isaiah said, "Y'all are going to be the light of the world." And so sin is always darkness and confusion, and goodness is always light and grace. And we look at Jesus and we see the light that he shined forth into the world, and then we come here and we absorb that light. We're supposed to go out and reflect it to the world. And if we're in a dark place, then our lives should be different from people who can't see the light yet. And so we've got to be a little bit distinct. It's not like enough for us to be all like the others. So let's talk about these daggone phones, right? So I did like kind of all those steps to focus everybody's attention on Jesus and the church and how we're supposed to be the light of the world there. And then it was just like kind of some common sense stuff. Hey, you do realize that you're the product that's being sold when you use Facebook, right? um, so like putting it in those terms, like that's a consideration. Like, are they really running acres of servers? This was a farming area. They used acres of servers, um, is running acres of servers. Are they going to do that for free? Are they doing this because they're nice people? And I don't know. They're not actually doing that. Hey, Kirk, they're actually, they're making money off of you. And these things will make you weak. And when you're weak, you can't do what Jesus tells you to do. The real world's going to be rough. It's not going to be smooth, but it'll make you strong. That was kind of the short version of the homily. So I had all of those steps to like help orient people towards the values that we should all agree on, because we're all in the church here. And I remind people of these values, and it was a pretty easy sell there. And I think there were some people who were like, yeah, you tell those kids, and they're like, well, okay, buddy, I don't know if your 6 hours of Fox News a day is any good for you, but
Yeah,
we'll see.
some people are always going to apply it to the people they want it applied to, and as a way to deflect from their own problems. But I like that, because I do think actually the key is the steps. And this is one of the big things I just have not been able to communicate, for 5.5+ years now to people. No, dummy, it's the steps. The steps are really important. The sides of the steps are important. Which steps you start with, super important, right? And everybody just seems to be collapsing and reducing and confusing things, because they're trying to make a point. And it's bizarre. So in this weird conversation, Colin Wright, the evolutionary biologist, whatever that's supposed to mean, kind of silly title actually, is making the argument that would apply to children and to adults as to why no surgery. And he's making an economic argument, which just, it costs more for healthcare. And then they had to jump back right on the other side, say, well, if you can afford it yourself, then it's okay. And I'm like, no, that's irrational and illogical.
This is some of your creation denial stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because like the argument is, like for me, in our tradition, it's like, you can't mutilate your body.
Yeah, it's not hard, right?
Yeah, it's like you're not allowed to mutilate your body. You basically got this thing, on a lease loan from God, and he expects you to use it in a certain way, and like, sometimes bad things happen. You get really bad diabetes and they got to cut your foot off, so that it doesn't kill your whole body. You got to have your appendix removed or something like that, but that's, you're sacrificing a part to save the whole. You're not just cutting it off because you don't like it.
Yeah. So to clarify, Father, Catholicism, as you understand it, does not consider Dylan Mulvaney kosher.
Well, kosher isn't really a category that we use, but we would say that Dylan is a man. So, and it's
not hard.
Cross-dressing is coming up again. Unless you got a really good reason, you shouldn't, wear the clothing that doesn't suit your person and your status in life, and you shouldn't mutilate your body. And whether you're doing that surgically or chemically, it's bad. So
the argument was interesting too, because their argument was, well, if it's cousin inbreeding, or worse. So I don't know why they focused on the cousin one when they could have gotten a more extreme example pretty easily. It's bad because it hurts society because genetics. But the way they were making the argument, it was always about this bigger thing. But then when they drilled down, they're like, well, if the individual has the cash, then their individual will's okay. And so they got into this trouble with children, and then they're like, oh, no, children. And then we can talk about the next steps. And I was like, this is bizarre. But their focus was not on the right thing, which is being is good resolves this pretty quickly. Being is good. You came out a certain way. That was good. And bang. And actually, it's rather interesting, Father, if you ever come back and you fly into Charlotte, we'll have to detour you over to the Billy Graham library there, because it's like a mile or something from the airport.
Well, that's good thinking on their part.
Yeah, very smart. There's a clip in there that they play on this very old, at least old looking TV. I don't know if it's modern and dressed up or whatever, but it looks old. Where it's Billy Graham and Woody Allen. And Woody Allen makes a self-deprecating joke about the way he looks. And Billy Graham is just unapologetically saying, God made you beautiful and perfect the way you are, or something to that effect, obviously. And it was just such a beautiful moment. I mean, I was really like, wow, this Billy Graham guy is kind of going on here. He really knows what he's doing. And it was a seamless answer. Like, he had it. It was in him. It was waiting to come out. Right. And I was just like, that's rare. Like, that's because he was so, even though unfortunately he wasn't Catholic, he was so well aligned that he just had it. Right. I mean, that's what made him so good at what he was doing. And you can see examples of that in there, and then there's the horrible ending part. But whatever. Still juju magic. Mark no like juju magic. But that way, and hopefully this will come out in the videos. I'm going to do it in two videos. Hopefully it'll come out like that contrast between thinking about it from the creation perspective, which I go into explicitly because I had to. I had no choice. It's like, oh, this is the fire you want to play with. Let me bring down the spiritual fire, my friends. Right? So it's like, no, this is easy to resolve. You need to start from a principle that works. And this is the principle that works. And it's not that hard. And then this gets resolved for children, for adults, for all kinds of cases where you don't run into problems like, well, maybe you have the money to do that. But the minute you pay somebody, they can't do surgery that's more important for other people because you're busy doing what is equivalent to an elective surgery.
Yeah, it's like, that's so unnecessary.
Well, and they actually don't understand resources are limited. And just because you can buy them doesn't make them less limited. And therefore, you don't waste a talented surgeon's time on things that aren't good. Whether the individual has the money or not. Like, it's not that hard, right? So there's a materialist argument here. It's just that both of them are, too stupid to understand it.
Sure. So you could let's take just to illustrate that principle. I'll put it into priest terms here. Let's imagine that there was a wealthy man who had a ranch outside of Fargo, and he wants to hire somebody full time to be a priest full time to be a chaplain for him and his family. And like, he'll pay the priest's room and board. He'll build the chapel, he'll furnish it himself, like he'll do everything, but like, I want this priest's attention full time for me, my wife, my 7 children. It's like, well, like maybe there'd be a retired guy that we could send to that, like that's his retirement plan right there. But like, they're not going to send me to take care of 9 people. Like, that's not a good use of our resources there.
Right.
So, you could certainly benefit the church, but, like, I'm putting it in the terms that I can understand.
No. The resource constraint never occurs to people on the left ever. Like ever. Like they don't understand the concept of resource constraint or any kind of constraint. Ultimately, if you listen closely, you'll figure it out. Oh, these guys just don't understand that there are constraints in the world, that there are limitations.
Well, so Mark, I'm someone who's going into finance, and from the polling I've seen, people in finance and macroeconomics tend to be an exception to the rule in academia, and they tend to be more right-leaning than other professions because they understand the importance of constraint.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So there was a trick I used to use, Kirk, that unfortunately no longer works. I would get all of my news from the financial channels. And the reason why is because that was completely unbiased news. Because currency doesn't care about those issues. And in order to report correctly about what's going on in finance, you have to maintain a neutral reporting status with respect to non-financial news. And because their primary reporting was finance, and this doesn't necessarily work anymore, by the way, but it used to. Because their primary reporting was finance, they almost never reported non-finance news until it was settled. And so you get with perfectly filtered news for a very long time, for many, many years. I don't think it is anymore. Bloomberg has gone completely off the rails. Bloomberg was always a little meh. But now they're completely nuts, which is too bad because they were very good and it was good to watch Bloomberg. You know what he was doing? He had the Fox News trick, right? Just hire every gorgeous female you can find from wherever and get a few in there from England because accents. That's a great strategy, right? That tactic used to work. It's very akin to Nassim Taleb's, read the news once a month from a month ago, right? Like, don't engage in news this month. Engage in news from last month, only once a month. right? So you get one little snapshot because that's the way you have the richest field of information.
Yeah.
And economics,
Specifically because you get a much better noise to signal ratio, right? Like
Right.
much more signal, much less noise when
Right.
you've just got that smaller, less frequent sampling.
Exactly. It's a well-known trick in sampling technology. Like if you're doing sampling on a computer or even in an analog system, right? That's a well-known trick in sampling. Right? You get rid of the noise by changing sampling rate. It's that simple as. There are trade-offs there, but
Well,
Usually worth it.
yeah.
So if I also may give my perspective, I think one of the reasons that people in macroeconomics and finance tend to be more right-leaning than other sectors of academia is because they don't have as much physics envy, which is they don't have a very materialist, reductionist view of the human person as, physicists do. I think they recognize the complexities of human nature.
Maybe a few of them do. I think it's just a side effect of what they're looking at, right? So the goal of so-called economists, and I'm still with the lab, all economists are frauds, except not all. He's backed off on that a little bit, but certainly the Freakonomics guy is not a fraud, but maybe everybody else is. I'm willing to go there. But the problem is, in order to do good economics, and there's two sort of types of economists. There's the economists that focus on money flow, basically, and there's the economists that focus on behavior, right? So the Freakonomics guys focus on economy as a function of human behavior. In order to do either of those, you have to be agnostic as to the political impact of things. You have to be, because otherwise you can't make predictions about what the currency is going to do, right? You can't make economic predictions if you couch them in a left-right, Democrat-Republican dichotomy. If you think of them in terms of, people voting, with their feet, we'll say, economics doesn't actually work. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, if you know why. Like, you can't actually understand human behavior if you're casting human behavior in any other frame, and that, I think, is really part of it, right? Whereas physicists very much don't want to observe physics. They don't want to observe particles. This is why Sabine Hassenfeld, there's a beautiful video about this, actually. The particle physicists keep coming up with new particles, and no, all the particles are known. The particle physics model from the 1940s or 50s or whatever is fairly complete and cannot be changed. Like, I'm sorry, they've been trying for 70 years and they just haven't been able to make it better. I don't know what else to say, right? She does a really good video on that because that's her field. But whereas with the economists, they're very much observing, right? They're observer oriented. They're looking at behavior and trying to decide what it is. All the other sciences are trying to manipulate, whether it's people or not. But this is why they stray into manipulating people, right? Because they want the fact of quantum physics to manipulate human behavior. That's all their goal. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I do think that that might be a factor. I would just say that another factor is this question of, like, do you hold a materialist ontology a priori? And I think that people in the natural sciences are much more likely to do that than people in the so-called social sciences.
That's really, like, historians and sociologists are notoriously like all atheists, and which, it's kind of tying us back to the beginning of the video here rather nicely, but it ends up crippling them when God shows up and does something. They're unable to explain it. So, I don't know how to account for that. There could be a whole lot of different things.
I actually didn't know that. I thought that the social sciences were much less materialistic.
Oh no, they're more
They're
materialistic.
horribly.
I think
Listen,
the
the
problem.
one thing that Mark and I don't disagree with this Peter Boghossian, Colin Wright video is that there's a problem in the university. There's definitely problems in the universities. We can agree with them on
Yes.
that, and the
Yeah.
just the absolute inability for them to cultivate wisdom in their students at your average university is just devastating, right? That the wisdom's much more important than like anything you're going to learn from a textbook. And yeah, it's just
Right. I think the confusion is that people cast materialism as a physicalist reductionist argument where there's only physical things in the world. But that's not really the best way to define materialism, because nobody's a physicalist reductionist actually, or the people that are so insane that everybody kind of recognizes that they're a little nuts.
like nobody really acts out that proposition.
I
C.S.
don't even
Lewis
Yeah, I don't think-
wrote a character that was like as close as you could get in That Hideous Strength.
Hmm.
Somebody who was just like sitting there commenting about how all of the urges and forces are moving him in this way. It was really he's kind of an unsettling character. I should probably read that book again. It's been a while, but there was some good stuff in there. But it's like if somebody actually believed that they were the sum of all of the chemical reactions in their brain, this is what they might look like, and it's not pretty. So they're very
Yeah, but they don't even talk like that, right? And you can't, right? Because, like, for example, you can't actually do economics if money isn't material, even though money is not material, right? Like, economics relies on the tools of science. Like, all science relies on the tools of science. It only has the three tools, right? It's got logic, reason, and rationality. That's it. That's all it has. Can't do anything else, right? And so anything that doesn't fall into that either gets super complex super fast and then breaks down, right? Because it has implications for, well, all these other things should be true, but they're not. That means your logic is wrong, by the way. I don't know why I didn't say that, but I feel like I do, right? If there's implications that don't manifest, then your reasoning is off. It's just that simple. But also you use the money and treat it like, this is the famous game theory thing I'm always talking about. Like, game theory pretty much very quickly breaks down to real-time calculus in your head when you're just buying a loaf of bread at the grocery store. Because of the sheer number of calculations you have to collapse to make game theory decision work, because when you take a simplified model like mathematics and you put it on top of a complex model like reality, right, and then you try to trace a single agent through that path, there's so many things in the way that you just end up with a ridiculous number of variables. And calculus, because calculus is largely estimations of things like close enough to infinity, right? They have calculations like that, but this is close enough, right? It's not exact. It's all close enough. Trigonometry suffers from the same ailment, we'll say. That's the only way to collapse the variables. And so you must be doing calculus in your head in real time. I can't do calculus at all. I can make a computer do calculus for me. That's not a problem. Although that's a long process. It's probably quicker for people to do on paper. But I can do that. I've done it before. I've had to do it, right? But I certainly am not doing that in my head when I go to buy a Snickers bar at the grocery store. I'm sorry. That's not an option that was ever on the table. That's what game theory implies, right? And actually, I'm fairly sure John Nash, the sort of father of game theory, wrote that down and said, obviously, this doesn't work, right? Or it has a limit or something. And that's because of those tools. So when you're dealing with those tools, where you say the material thing or the bridge to the material thing, in the case of currency, is an abstraction of material, right? In other words, my work gets turned into, ironically, a material, if we're talking about physical dollars or coins or something, material, and then that material is exchangeable for other material. Right? And so when you're doing economics, you're only ever talking about the material. And if you need to know more about that, you can go to Navigating Patterns channel, and you can look up my video on economics, because I have one. It's actually really short, because this isn't that hard. Economists is like, I've got a PhD in economy. You guys can't even define money, and you don't understand some basic stuff. And then a 10-minute video, or maybe that one's 20, it's short. I can explain all of this stuff better than all of your theories combined. This isn't that hard, but they make it hard.
Yeah, I suppose.
But that's where the materialism comes from. So like in the discussion about, whether or not cousin inbreeding is okay, the materialism comes from the statistics on what will happen. Right? And like that's how they generate the material to do the science on. Well, we can do the science on this genetic frame of what will happen, ignoring all the history. Like this is, people say the end of history. This end of history is wrong. It's backwards. It's the beginning of history, because they ignore all the historical data that would tell them their science is incorrect. Right? Oh no, your statistics don't work. I go over that in the videos, by the way, so you can engage with it there when they come out. But like, there's all this evidence that what they're saying is BS. Basically, it's nonsense, and they just ignore all that because it's sample bias. And fair enough, like it's hard. Like I get it, but that's what makes them materialist. Is they take an abstraction, they link it to material, and then they do logic, reason, rationality on it. Right? And they use inference and things like that. That's where they go wrong. Not all the time, because it's not all wrong, but also it strays into the wrong territory really, really fast. Like, oh, well, we can ban sex change operations for children, but we can't do it for adults because if they have enough money, they should be able to. It's nonsense. It's nonsense.
Yeah. All right. So that sounded pretty useful right there. The bit about you taking an abstraction, you materialize it, and then you try and do the science thing on it.
Yeah.
So like
statistics.
Yeah, and that's I think that'd be also a place where a lot of psychology would go wrong, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
just trying to come up with an example of the way people would do that, it'd be something like, well, people who have 4 or more drinks in an evening 3 times a week, they do much more poorly. No, that's not
People
quite right.
people whose fathers beat them tend on average to, right?
Yeah.
Abuse their wives or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? So they're materializing it. In Colin's case, what he was doing is, I can't remember the name of I was laughing too hard, literally laughing the whole first part of the video. It was very funny to me. Maybe that's bad on me, but also I don't care. It was hysterical. I had a blast. He said 1 in 4 will end up with this condition. And I was like, well, first of all, why is this a problem? What if they have 3 kids and none of them end up with it? Colin, didn't think about the numbers here, did you? What if they have 12 kids and they're okay with 3 of them having this condition? Like, that none of these formulas work. Like they just don't work. That's the funny part. Right? So, that was a way to do the inference that would be appropriate with logic and reason rationality, is to use the statistics, which are an abstraction, right? Necessarily. It's 1 in 4 theoretical children.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
You could have 4 children and 2 of them get it. Like that's how statistics work.
Exactly. Like it's meaningless, right? Because in any sample, the distribution is not going to be 1 in 4. Like this is just, I don't understand statistics 101, which is something that Taleb talks about. Like they obviously don't understand statistics. It's pretty clear. And statistics is hard, granted. I just spent a lot of time learning statistics. So Taleb was a breath of fresh air. I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I found. Thank you, Taleb. And then he added to it because there's a bunch of stuff he figured out that I was only vaguely, like I knew something was there, but I didn't understand it. And he explained it, which was nice. When you use statistics, which is an abstraction of groups, and then a further abstraction of one item of the group, 1 in 4. Now we can do science. We can do logic, reason, rationality. And the interesting part this is so funny throughout the whole thing. Colin's going, well, I'm agnostic as to how you interpret the data. I'm like, then why are you even having the argument if you don't care what conclusion the Pakistanis come to as the result of your biology? Why are you making the argument? I don't understand. Like, this is point. You're wasting your time entirely by your own admission, and you don't even realize it. So it's abstractions like that. Oh, well, when you're traumatized, that explains this behavior. It's like, I don't know. There's a bunch of people that are traumatized that don't have that behavior. What explains that? See, they never take the negative case to do the contrast to see clearly that obviously the trauma is not causing that. Is the trauma a contributing factor? Everything's a contributing factor. So that's not saying much, but sure, I guess. Also, I think you're a little dumb.
Yes, yes. Being
I'll
able
pat you on
to,
the head and be polite. Why
like,
not?
that's the real phenomena, right? We'll take the unfortunate topic of being beaten as a child. Like, that doesn't actually tell you what kind of response that the person's going to have. They might become like super pacifist and say, I'm never going to hurt anybody. Or
Right.
they might become super violent. They might just drink themselves into oblivion, or they might make it a very high priority for them to always avail themselves of the grace of God, because that was the only comfort and solace. I mean, there's like 1,000 different ways, at least, that people can respond to these things. And like, you can't measure that with science, because people are much more complicated than that.
Yes.
And have agency. So, yeah. Okay.
Right.
Turns out not
the
everything can be fit into Schrodinger's equation, Father.
Yeah.
Good.
Actually, I'm glad to hear it. Like,
everything,
how big is Schrodinger's equation? I'm 6 feet tall, about 240 pounds. I don't know if I could fit into that.
You haven't seen my shirt, my Schrodinger shirt?
No,
Oh, I've done everyone a disservice. I'll try to remember next time to put it on.
Okay.
My mother bought me a Schrodinger's equation T-shirt where Schrodinger's equation is written out as a cat on the shirt in long form. It's hysterical. Actually, technically, everything fits in Schrodinger's equation because his whole point was uncertainty. Like, he was trying to explain to physicists that they're retarded because there's uncertainty in the middle. And in order to explain it in terms of states, which is something I'm very familiar with because we use those in computers all the time. And yes, it's exactly the same. Sorry for anybody who thinks it's not, you're wrong. Just flat out. You can't have a state that has two states because that destroys the idea of a state. Schrodinger, if you actually read anything about this, you'll kind of figure out he's trolling his idiot friends. That most of them got the joke, but most of the people that came after have not gotten the joke, much like reading Plato's Republic. And
did he actually have to write, a state can't have two states?
No, he didn't write that, but it's obvious in the equation that that's what he's hinting at, is that
Okay. So he's just applying the law of non-contradiction to quantum mechanics.
He's pointing to the fact that you can't do physics on potential. In other words, physics can't make predictions about the future, period, full stop. That's what he's doing. And he's saying, look, if you tried to do this, you would end up having to posit or predict a state that had two states all the time until the waveform collapsed effectively. I mean, it's a little more complicated, but not much. You have to open the box.
Yeah, you got to open the box, right?
It's the observer problem. He's actually just restating the observer problem a little bit differently, right? And adding in the fact that you can't actually do discrete math on a two-state variable that is only supposed to have one state, because discrete math requires variables that are only in one state at once.
Right.
It's just a contradiction. Sorry, right? Physics can't make predictions. Sorry, because all predictions collapse into an actuality at the moment of observation. It's the observer problem, effectively.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so Father, I'm interested in studying more about physics, and as you know, I'm interested in philosophy. Although it's some of what I consider philosophy, Mark doesn't consider philosophy, and that's fine. I think a lot of contemporary physics tends to contradict Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics.
Oh, well, I don't think that's correct. Like,
Well,
what is
so
like this uncollapsed state if it's not just like potential that hasn't been actualized yet?
so for example, correct me if I'm mistaken, Father, but I haven't read Aristotle, but I've heard that Aristotle believed that entities are primary and that potentiality is secondary. Correct?
He would say that actuality is more real than potential.
Okay.
Entities wouldn't really be the kind of vocabulary that I'm familiar with him using.
So I may have been wrong. I might be confusing because I've heard in lectures from Ayn Rand, like Institute, that Aristotle believed that entities are primary and events are a result of entities acting, but there are certain theoretical physicists, for example, Lee Smolin believes that at the quantum level, what's fundamental are events and not substances.
Yeah, well, that's actually probably correct, and I don't think that contradicts uh, Aristotle at all.
Okay, so Aristotle did not necessarily believe in a strict substance ontology.
Well, so he certainly did like his substance ontology, right? But like, what is a substance for him? You've got stuff. Oh, okay, that's Schrodinger's equation.
With the short
That's
form at the bottom.
yeah. I'm not going to read that.
I can't read it either. I just think it's the funniest T-shirt ever. So
Yeah. So you've got form and matter. That's the sort of things that come up into the that make up a substance here. The form is the intelligible pattern, right? The structural, functional organization of the thing, and the matter is the thing that receives that structural, functional organization. So, you could take like you're a human being, right? And you've got, we can examine this on various different levels. We could look at like organs or tissues or cells, or we could break it all the way down to like the atomic level if you really feel like it. But all of the parts that are really you are participating in the form of human being. And so they all have their contribution to the functioning of the whole there. So that's kind of the basic thing there, and the intellect is capable of abstracting that spiritual pattern and learning about it, and being able to understand those things, which is why it can become a universal, because it can be abstracted from the particular matter, and when you've got enough things that you can observe, you can abstract that out right there. Now, when we
Okay.
get to the question of things like quantum physics, right? And what these guys are doing in the lab, and they have to do it because it's all they can do. And so I don't necessarily think they're doing anything wrong. And it's like, oh, we've got a beam of electrons right now, or we've got, like we're going to calculate the spin of these electrons using our electron spin calculators. They're breaking these things down into their very smallest components here at the quantum level there, right? And so like you can have layers of organization within something. So you can, analyze complex proteins inside the human body, or you can analyze, the function of those proteins inside the cells, or you can analyze, how tissues function, or how organs function, or how organ systems function, or how human beings function when they're actually out in the world, or how societies of human beings function, or how the whole, cosmic scheme of human history is going, right? You can study all of these things. The level of studying that the quantum physicists are engaged in are basically like one step above pure potential, right? So like a very little of this is actually been fully actualized there. And this isn't something I particularly familiar with, and I'll accept an authoritative correction on it. But my understanding is that if you like quarks are always in like 3 quark clusters, That they're like they're always doing that. And anytime physicists have broken them apart, they always like instantly recombine there, right? It's like they can only really exist in these. So like if you get like beneath that, you've just got pure potential that needs to actualize into something. Otherwise, it isn't actually anything there. All of that to say, I think these people from the Ayn Rand Institute don't really understand Aristotle.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so it is compatible with just to clarify, it is compatible with Aristotle to say that at the quantum level, what you have are fundamentally events and not like substances.
I mean they're at a very low and unformed level of reality right there. So they don't act much like substances because Aristotle was giving practical categories that Alexander the Great might find useful. Right. So they don't act very much like substances at that level because they're so far abstracted from, anything that has any real gravity and like proper functioning. But I think Aristotle can still handle quantum mechanics right there. It's just like these things are very, very much close to matter, far away from form. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so Ayn Rand doesn't know what she's talking about.
or yeah, and
Ayn Rand does not know what she's talking about. That is correct. Like
Okay.
Ayn Rand, people think Ayn Rand's a philosopher, right? The best critique of Ayn Rand is this guy named Nathaniel Brandon, who was her lover, by the way. I don't know if his website's still up. The biggest critique of Ayn Rand's philosophy is best embodied in The Simpsons. They have this, I forget the name of the episode, but they have an episode where they have the A is A daycare center, which is a Mac on Ayn Rand. And this is where it gets really interesting, right? The critique of Ayn Rand is her philosophy doesn't work for children. As a fair critique, nothing that she talks about works for children. Okay, you know who else's philosophy doesn't work for children? Everyone after Plato. Period. And I'm sorry, but also it's in the texts, or rather, it's missing from the subsequent texts. It's in the Republic. Right? Plato uses children to exemplify the problem of contrast, the problem of forbidden knowledge, which is one of the driving forces for how to build the perfect city. Forbidden knowledge required to account for, to build perfect city, right? How you handle it, not doing away with it, because that's dumb. You need it, right? Yeah, Ayn Rand, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, like anybody else you can name after Plato and Aristotle also have that problem. They don't account for children in their so-called philosophy. Is it a philosophy? I would argue no. That makes it an ideology by definition. That's the easiest, quickest, and best definition right there. You're not going to find a cleaner definition than to say if it doesn't account for children, it's an ideology. Otherwise, it's a philosophy.
Fair enough, Mark. But I'm glad, Father, that that the physics that I'm going to be learning in college is not going to be incompatible with Aristotle.
yes, it's nice. It's nice that his best works still survive and are still useful. There's certain details, certain things that aren't good, but I don't have another word for it, Mark. I don't have another word for it. But the metaphysics, the study of being as such, right? Like
Religion.
that stuff's really good. Okay.
Just religion, Father. That's the study of being as such is religion. That's obviously that's what it's always been. That's why you need a story of creation. Not that hard.
Okay. Math. All right. We'll just try and help Sandy here. Active in the so I don't think that math and physics are both active in the making and the existence of human beings. Math and physics are how we mathematically, or how we explain these things. They're tools.
They're maps.
Yeah, they're maps and tools. Yeah. But like the actual like composing of human beings is much more complicated than a physical model could actually explain for us, which is fine, because like physics should mostly be there so that we can send things to the moon. Like that's the most noble and important work of physics. Like, how do we send things to the moon? Yeah, that's actually a thing I wanted to turn back to, Mark. You talked about how physics can't actually predict anything.
Yeah.
Which is why all of our rocket ships would have to have guidance computers on them.
Yeah.
Because like they could set up the initial trajectory, like get things pretty close, but it's like, no,
That's right.
we're gonna have to just make sure we got these things calculated.
Yeah,
okay.
Father. Hold on. Guess what else? All automated systems need correction in flight. That goes for the thing that I thought would never need that, which are computer systems, which I happen to be an expert at, like one of the top guys. If you need self-healing automation for your computer system, like I build systems that you can just walk away from and you never need a human again, which is very hard to do. There's only a handful of people that can even do that. They need correction. They need auto healing, it's called, or self-healing. That's what it's usually referred to as. They need it.
Can we not say that Christ is both God and man? Easy as pie. Physics is a different discipline from theology, and they operate on different principles and different rules.
Yeah, if you want to make predictions about the world, that is fundamentally religious. And the way to make those predictions is to use the patterns from the Bible, and that is as close as you can get. And it's super accurate, actually. It's surprisingly and shockingly accurate. And that's actually what the scientists are objecting to and trying to replace. And that's why they keep saying there's a war between science and religion, because they don't like the fact that their system doesn't work and the system that they're trying to get around does. It's as simple as.
Yeah. No, God hasn't made theology and God hasn't made physics. These are sciences that human beings have created. And it's perfectly fine for human beings to create sciences and to try and have a disciplined exploration of the things of this world. But physics has as its starting principle, physical observation, empiricism, measurement, rigorous mathematics, repeated experimentation, and the like. And that's how you get physical observations. And we require this because our intellects are small and like not able to understand these things all holistically. Theology has as its starting principles divine revelation and we'll say logic at a certain point. You can use it is an ology right there. So we've got logic. So things like the principle of non-contradiction, appropriate construction of syllogisms right there. That would be how theology proceeds. Yeah, okay. So we are like secondarily creating physics, but like physics is always smaller than the things that it's measuring by necessity. And it's fine because, oftentimes getting close enough on these things, the engineers are going to put a margin of error in the, the material science. And like, we're going to build this rather stronger than we think it needs to be. And then the things actually work there. Yeah, because physics only, I'm not sure this is useful.
Yeah, logic pre-exists physics, right? And it's apart from it. Physics uses logic to draw conclusions. All of those conclusions break down when you go to quantum. Sorry, logic doesn't work on quantum at all. Neither does reason or rationality. Like, they don't work. Your intuition breaks when you get to quantum physics, right? Now, standard particle model physics, that's not true. Particle physics, because they're based on a material abstraction called a particle, all right, that has limitations. And this goes right to the quarks, actually, but that's way too complicated to try to explain. When you look at particles at the electron and proton level and not below that, logic, reason, rationality, and intuition work fine. If you try to go below that, it all fails. Logic doesn't apply to quantum physics at all. Time doesn't apply to quantum physics. I think that's the problem. Like, quantum physics breaks time. This is why they have time crystals and they're talking about reversing time and all this nonsense. I think that's really the problem, is that because physics is a poor, very poor map of reality, of a certain part of reality, it just runs into limitations. It's within the thing, right? It's part of a creation. And we manifest the methodology and thinking of physics. Physics is not an inherent item of the universe. It's just a way to understand the reality or the created order.
And Sandy says, I tend to believe in prayer, intercession, God acting in the physical and non-physical patterns being part of all this, as well as the roots and trees and touchable things. There's nothing in that I particularly disagree with.
Yeah.
So
then you don't need physics or sciences of any kind, which I've been saying forever.
Yep.
These are unnecessary things.
Well, yeah, to be fair to what you were saying, Mark, about the passage of time, the guy I was referencing earlier, Lee Smolin, he actually does take a view that time is fundamental. So he is not like other physicists who accept Einsteinian orthodoxy. He does not believe in the black universe. So it's not consensus among physicists.
No, there's no scientific consensus is a lie. First of all, science isn't supposed to have a consensus by definition. And second of all, yeah, these people never agree on anything, especially not at that level. And the reason why they don't agree is because you can always change your frame slightly, right? You can always add or subtract from the layer of reality you're looking at and come to very different conclusions about the world. And that's really the problem, is that that's why they run into arguments. It's easy to look at the statistics on cousin marriages in Pakistan and come to conclusions about what's going to happen. But actually, Pakistan's been around for a while now, and you can just observe and figure out what's going to happen and ditch the math entirely, and you'll get a real answer. If you use the math, you're not going to get a real answer. You're going to get a math answer. And that math answer is, maybe it will match reality with some level of precision, but like, you can just count. Like, you don't need to calculate. It's been 4 generations since Pakistani cousin marriage was 60% of the population. Whatever nonsense. You have to do all this nonsense just to get there, right? And then you can just observe the population and see what happened, rather than saying, well, eventually they're all going to use up the healthcare system in Pakistan. And Pakistan doesn't really have one, because they're all going to be mutated because first cousin marriages. None of this talk makes any sense. And that was the interesting thing about the talk. They framed it as a talk about U.S. immigration and then talked about Pakistan and the U.K. Didn't talk at all about U.S. immigration. That was funny. The title is U.S. immigration. There's no talk about it in the talk.
Yeah. It's really interesting that if you read the Old Testament, you get the sense that, like, the Catholic Church would require cousin marriage because that's what Abraham did. It was like, hey, Isaac, listen, make sure you marry your cousin. You know, I married my half sister. Everything worked out great for me. You know, but it's really just kind of like a Roman thing, where they're like, we don't really do cousin marriage here. We can get you dispensations if you really have to, but we'd rather not. You know, that just kind of got propagated over the West because, hey, guess who was in Rome? You know, the Pope. So kind of the squeamishness about that is just a kind of a peculiarly Roman thing that got propagated. And I think it's probably better, but like, I don't know. Not planning anything.
Yeah, it's just an interesting way to do this argumentation. Like, immigration's so much bigger than Pakistani or even Muslim practices. Like, that actually is orthogonal to why it's a problem now and wasn't a problem before, which, again, like, it's the beginning of history for these guys. We have a history of successful immigration, and we can use that fact to look at a change, to monitor a change in immigration, and then draw some conclusions. Do they engage in any of that process? No, they pretend like it doesn't exist. So it's just so bizarre. And so do the critics, right? They say, well, everybody in the US is an immigrant. And it's like, if you have a really dumb definition of immigration that applies to actually all groups throughout the world, then that would be correct. Also, why would that be a useful frame at that point? Because the Pakistanis are immigrants too, technically. And they were immigrants when they were part of India. And Indians are immigrants. Like, everyone's an immigrant at that point because everyone's moved around. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, how is that useful? But they can't technically, mentally engage in these arguments because it's too hard for them. They're just, you're not the
Well,
guy.
they're trying to use the tools of like logic, reason, and rationality with really bad starting principles.
Right. And they're bad at logic, reason, and rationality. Like, this is, I feel bad for Peter Boghossian because he's clearly just not there in terms of his use of these tools. Colin too, right? And the only reason I felt comfortable doing the video is because I've tried to engage these guys before with very simple, easy, straightforward, honest questions that actually you need to answer to some extent, right? And they just refuse to engage with me. And I'm not mad, whatever, I don't care. But they often say, like, well, you need to keep an open mind. And I'm like, why do you guys think that's possible? You two can't do it. And I know that I have the evidence. I can go through Twitter and show you the evidence. This is not that hard. They're not doing that. So they say that's what you should do. They can't do that. I don't think anyone can do it, to be totally fair to them. I think anyone can do it.
The purpose of the mind is like the purpose of the mouth, to shut again on something solid.
Oh, I like it.
That was G.K. Chesterton. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
No, it's the purpose of opening the mind is like the purpose of opening a mouth, to shut it again on something solid.
To shut it again on something solid. Yeah, fair enough. But that is the problem, is that they believe in a fantasy that they're trying to live out, where an open mind and facts are all you need to fix whatever problem it is. There's no force involved. There's no coercion. There's no enchantment. There's no leadership. There's no exemplification. None of these components that actually move the world are involved.
It's basically like a computer program reading the data and putting out the correct response.
Right, from a non-programmer who doesn't recognize there's a programmer. And then you wonder why people have this goofy idea that we live in a simulation. And I'm like, because the way science talks, we must live in a simulation.
Yeah.
Technically correct. Just that science is wrong, but whatever. Right? Because they're just ignoring the fact that there's a created order, and that's what they're observing. Science observes a created order, right? Created order is the realm of theology, technically speaking, or religion. You go either way there, right? And science is inside of, embedded within that, right? And can only deal with a small part of that. And that's still the problem.
Yeah. The solution is very simple.
Oh, yeah. Put up the solution. We have the solution. It's right here. Bingo.
Go to Mass, go to confession, pray the rosary, don't skip leg day. You do these things and you will live.
Yeah, and you don't need a quantum formula for that.
No, you don't need a quantum formula for that. You just need to go to church. You just need to have a rosary, and you just need a barbell and some weights, man. It's like easy peasy. Anybody could manage this.
Maybe. Not quite everybody. But
I don't know, man. I think if anybody actually wanted this, they could do it.
Nope. I start working out with 10-pound weights and I collapse.
Okay, well, you can still do leg day with that.
No. It's any movement.
That can count as your leg day. You have legs. You can exercise them somehow. Look. I really enjoy my weightlifting. It's very useful for me. I'm glad it's going as well as it does. But when I put the don't skip leg day down there, it's just do difficult things that are going to be good for you. Like that's the real message. But
All
that's
right.
too many
Yeah.
words, and don't skip leg day is a lot
I'm
pithier.
I'm with you. I'm just pointing out that this physical thing is not working out for everybody.
Okay. All right. All right.
But I agree. I try to do hard things. Today was hard because I had to do 2 videos listening to idiots. It's so yeah. I feel like they owe me money for having listened to them. It's just torturous.
Yeah. Well, hey, somebody's got to do it because what Sally Joe posted that.
Yes, Sally. I think she's regretting it now, but actually it was quite fun. This is my favorite commentary. It was more of a reaction video because I didn't watch it first. I watched it, in the video, live while you're
Oh, you did a Vanderplay style.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was fun. Like it wasn't Eric Weinstein being a jerk, right? These guys were just being dumb. And it was funny how they were being stupid. So I just got a lot of laughing in today. So it was good. It was good. I had to take 2 breaks and stuff. So, and I had to split it into 2 videos, even though I didn't want to. It was only an hour and 9 minutes, but there was so many things I had to point out because they were just making so many mistakes. I was like, wow, how do you make this many mistakes like in 2 minutes? That's amazing. There should be like a gold medal for that stuff because they'd win it for sure. At one point, Boghossian's going, this is Peter Boghossian now, right? The whole circle squared hoax thing, right? He's part of that, right? He goes, I'm
not familiar. Would you just give me that?
Those were the white papers they wrote that were bogus white papers that they submitted.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That was years ago now, right?
Okay. And James Lindsay was running in those circles, right?
It was Lindsay Boghossian and what's her name? I can't remember the woman's name now. Helen Pluckrose. There it is. Brain's a little slow. Sorry. Yeah, they wrote those, and then Boghossian's going, oh well, I'm beginning to get skeptical of the institutions. I'm like, you caused that skepticism to some extent, sir. Also, you were skeptical. And that's why you did that. This makes no sense. It makes no sense. But it was funny. I mean, like things like that are just funny to me. I'm like, do you really not? Like this sounds like a joke. It sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit. It really does.
Sort of like
it was a riot.
It's like somebody's coming in and their pants are on fire, and I'm like, I'm feeling a little hot. Like what's going on here? Like why is it so smoky in here?
Yeah.
Because your pants are on fire. Did you not notice that? Yeah.
And these people have been skeptical publicly of the institutions for years at this point. And to say that, I was just like, I don't know. I feel like that's why you're doing what you're doing and why you have any audience at all. So, but whatever. I guess if this is your coming out, I don't know. I think that's hysterical. Mm-hmm. And they were both bitten by academia in different ways, right? So it was just, this is that crowd that said, the left me, and then they're trying to say they're not leftists. And I'm like, if the left you, you didn't change. You're still a leftist. I don't understand. Right? But did you wash it off in the shower? Like, what are we talking about? So it was a lot of weird mistakes like that. But of all the commentaries and reaction style videos that I've done, that was actually the easiest and my favorite, which is why I was able to do both parts in one day. So it's going to be good when it comes out. It was quite interesting, and it exemplifies a lot of the interesting problems that the science people are running into nowadays too.
I'm curious, Mark, do you ever plan on doing a Steven Pinker video?
No, Pinker's not worth my time. He's low IQ thinker. It's just ridiculous. Bad statistics, doesn't understand much of anything. I think Taleb finally found something that Pinker said that was correct once, and that was recently, a couple months ago or whatever. And Taleb, where credit's due, Taleb's awesome anyway, but Taleb was like, oh, I finally agree with Steven Pinker on something. Like, fair enough. But then Pinker always steps in it because Pinker's he's just not that bright, right? I mean, he's a lot like Malcolm Gladwell, and I like Malcolm, but also these are not high IQ, high quality cognitive thinkers. They just aren't. They're just very low grade populists.
Why do you use the term leftists?
Because that's the term they use. And so
Who's they?
pretty much everybody uses left and right to designate everything. I don't know
it's
why.
just like a matter of convenience, because it just struck me, right? Like what's up with this, right? Like this, you know. And I understand like the history of like the French Revolution, and these people were sitting on the right, and these people were sitting on the left, and that's how we got here. But is there like a proper?
But they won't. They weren't. The French Revolution had 3 factions. Like everybody forget, there are no revolutions with 2 factions, except for what happened in America, which is very, very interesting, right? Because that's why it's unique, because it was a binary. Either you're, quote, with the king or you're not. And the way it's not a binary is that the king was not there. The complaint wasn't against the king, it was against the treatment of parliament. And the thing that flipped everybody was the king did not correctly intercede to do the right thing for the colonies. And once the colonies figured out we can't appeal to the king because the king is no longer here, they said, oh, we need to replace the king. That is correct. Now they replaced the king with a kingless system because they didn't have an option of, they didn't have a royal line, right? But of course, you know, the Mayflower Yankees effectively became the de facto standard for the next, I think it's 70 or whatever years, for power in the United States. So the hierarchy doesn't go away; it just changes.
Yeah. But I just wish I wish, you know, am I allowed to wish that we had a better term for it, like this continual, you know, rebelling against authority.
It's identification against.
Yeah.
Right. So there are 2 factions. You can break it into 2 factions. You can say there's the people that identify against, and then there's the people that are identifying for something. The people that are identifying for something have something to conserve. Therefore, they are conservatives, right? Everybody else who identifies against has to conserve something, because otherwise you have nothing, and they're very greedy, right? And that makes you able to understand what's going on. But in terms of political faction, there's still 3, right? There's Democrat and Republican, and almost nobody's registered Democrat or Republican in the United States. Almost everybody's registered independent, right? And so what does that tell you? That tells you they self-sort into 3 buckets. So if you're using self-reporting, we have the perfect self-reporting device in politics. Why are you using 2 buckets? And I think there's a technical reason why they're using 2 buckets. So this is what I've been playing with recently. I actually go over it in my video there. The pattern that I have noticed is that there are a certain class of people, irrespective of high IQ, which correlates with absolutely nothing except on the low end, as Nassim Taleb has the numbers to point out, by the way. So if you don't believe me, just read his stuff. It's all there. He's got white papers on it. He's not the only one, but he's got the best work on it. I think these people are incapable of holding 2 positive things in their head at once. Period. Like, I think they can only hold 2 items in their head. And because you need contrast to see, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. And I think that explains why they flip all the time. Right? They constantly flip. They go like, well, you can't side with the left because they're the bad guys. And then they go, well, I can't side with the right because they're making these mistakes. And then it's right. And now they're back on the left. And then they go back and forth all the time. The only explanation I have is that they can't hold 3 things in their head, 1 negative and 2 positive. They can't do it. I think it's just an actual cognitive thing that you could probably measure if you were clever enough with measurement and figure out who can and can't. But I don't bother with that. I just listen to how they talk. If they speak in a binary and they only ever bring up 2 items, and the way they get around 2 items is just to switch which 2 items they're talking about. So they'll pick one and then they'll ditch one and pick up a different one, but then they're only talking about these two. I think that's the pattern. They only ever talk about 2 items. They can't talk about 3 items at once. They can't say there's Democrats, moderates, and conservatives. They can't say that because it screws up their ability to understand anything because they can't hold it in their head. I think that's what's going on. Like I think that there's some mechanism that we could name there and that would explain that. I think that's why Ben Shapiro kept saying 2 things can be true at once.
Yeah.
Right. And that was my clue. I'm like, why does he say 2 things can be true? I mean, he's not wrong. He's, what he was saying was bang on. But why was he saying it? And why was it always on the left? It's like, because the left are the low IQ people. Sorry. They just are. They're the cognitively naive crew in all
That's
cases.
what it is. It's like, I don't want to use IQ. What the heck's IQ? There's like some sort of, I mean, it's like, I think it would almost always be accompanied by a profound lack of humility as well. Like,
Right.
I think there's a good number of people who probably have the same incapacity to handle these things. And then they just look at it and say, I've burned my hand on this enough. I don't really understand it. I'm just going to follow this guy because he's proven reliable,
Right.
and then they do a lot better, because they're just gonna go with the flow, and like, they can do a lot, but they're not going to be in a position where they can do really complicated leadership stuff.
Right. When they're not going to want to, because anytime you identify something, they have to identify it against it. They have to. I don't know why they have to. That seems to be.
Well, that'd be the lack of humility right there, right?
Maybe that explains it. I mean, it could. I'm not. There's genuine exploration that needs to be done around this phenomena.
Yeah,
but I think it is a phenomenon.
No, I can. I've met these people, right? And like,
me too.
Some of them are infuriating, and others are perfectly lovely, as far as I could tell. And
but they're all perfectionists.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? And
they're all idealists or perfectionists of another kind. All of them.
Right. So there's usually a certain rigidity, and you just hope it forms around the right things, right?
Yep.
Right. Like you would hope it would go, form around, go to mass, go to confession, pray the rosary. And like, you have to do these things if you're going to be a good Catholic,
Don't skip leg day. Right.
Yeah. Right. I'm thinking of specifically Catholic stuff here. Aristotle could have come up with don't skip leg day. He couldn't come up with the mass. But like you can see those. Yeah. So I don't want like an inability in somebody, right? They just can't do something. They're incapable. Like that shouldn't ever lead to sin.
I don't think it leads to sin necessarily. I think that this is why I don't think it's humility, because I think that if you embody some form of humility, the fact that you identify against doesn't have a negative impact anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is you're able to submit to something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the combination of identifying against and not submitting because freedom or individualism or libertarianism or
I'm not
whatever.
sure we're actually disagreeing. We're actually disagreeing right now.
No, I'm not trying to identify a disagreement. I'm just saying I don't think humility explains it. Right.
Okay.
But I think the addition of the lack of humility along with the cognitive limitation explains it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily, and I think that's actually the problem. Leftism doesn't necessarily lead to sin in the short term, but it necessarily leads to sin in the long term. And again, it's that history doesn't exist problem, because if you could just look at history, you'd see how these things are going to unfold, right? Like it's not that hard. Like you can just look and there it is. Right. Or you go read Chesterton and find out, oh yeah, all this stuff was happening back then too. Right. Or one example is Boghossian brought up, I forget which scandal it was. The Hunter Biden laptop thing. And I'm like, things like the Hunter Biden laptop thing have been going on my whole life. Like, I get that that's the thing that triggered him into, hey, wait, something's amiss in the barn, right? It's like, there's been a death in the dining room. But also, there was always a death in the dining room. You just never went in there. Obviously, you haven't been paying attention to politics until recently. And that was the one that clued you in that politics was corrupt. Politics has been corrupt for a long time, buddy. Right? And so it is that lack of humility. And then they can't engage with history because they can't submit to, hey, maybe the people in the past had the answer, because none of this has actually changed much as the result of technology. Right?
Yeah. Well, there's certain things that have no technological solution, like the corruption of man and the perennial patterns of sin that we find ourselves in. There's also no technological solution for infinite alertness and infinite awakeness. And you may have noticed that it's grown dark outside. Irrational creatures would certainly go to bed under such circumstances. So, Mark, I think our discussion of the last 10 minutes has been very interesting. I think you might be onto something there. And I'll ponder this, but I'll ponder it in my bed. So, good night, and God bless you all.
Good night, Father.